Hi guys. This is so strange. I've never done this before. I am. Can everybody hear me? Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, this is good. Um, I am going to be joined in with Molly Harris Olsen, CEO of Fairtrade, New Zealand and Australia, any minute. She's going to. Hi, Siddharth. She's going to request to join in this call in 1 minute because we're meant to start at 7, but I was all nervous and I don't know how to use this, so I wanted to be early. So let's see if she comes in. So it's Fashion Revolution Week, and this is why we're doing this. And what more important time to be doing this than during COVID, really, when we can stop and think and rethink new systems. Molly's still not ready. I'm waiting for her. I'm trying to find her. Where is she? Hi, Rena. Awesome. That's great. I can see some familiar faces. Oh, that's awesome. Let me see if I can find her. I'm so sorry, guys. It's like I'm talking to myself. It's really weird. Oh, here we go. View. We're here. Go live. Here we go. That's great. So I've just accepted Molly into the conversation. Yay!
Finally.
Hi, Molly.
How are you? How are you, Garcia?
Yeah, really good. I was talking to myself for about 2 minutes and it was super awkward. I've never done this before and it completely freaked me out. And I can see that there's quite a lot of people already tuning in.
Awesome.
So there was, there's also almost up to 100 people already tuning into the conversation. So
Fantastic. That's awesome. Well, I am technologically challenged, so it's I'm glad we finally made it happen. Maddie at my end helped us to get the technology right. So lovely,
you're
lovely, lovely to
sideways,
see you.
Molly. You're sideways. You need to flip your camera.
I have to keep it this way.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I thought I would just introduce. Firstly, I thought I would introduce why we're doing this talk, and maybe let you introduce yourself, or I've got your bio, so I can introduce you, because it's very exciting to be speaking to you with someone with so much knowledge. So, I wanted on Monday, Fashion Revolution Week started, and which really came about from the Rana Plaza disaster, which took place in Bangladesh in 2013, and 1,133 garment workers lost their lives. And that was really purely to poor infrastructure at a factory, which is completely avoidable. So it kickstarted a movement of consumer demand for greater transparency in the fashion supply chain. And this is something that Fairtrade has been doing prior to the Rana Plaza disaster, and that Kowtow's been involved in for 15 years now. So I'm Gosha, and I'm the founder and creative director of Kowtow. And this is Molly Harris Olsen, and she is the CEO of Fairtrade New Zealand and Australia. We wanted to do this talk originally in the stores, but since COVID happened, we thought, well, let's do this online. And what an opportunity, really, to, during this time, during the pandemic, to rethink our world, including our consumption habits and practices, and how we can move in. I don't particularly think where we were was a very positive place. So can we move forward into a more positive place? So I want to just give the audience a bit of a background about you, because I think where you come from will give context to the conversation. And so Molly worked on campaigns for the Rainbow Warrior and was named one of the Australian Financial Review 100 Women of Influence, and served as Executive Director on President Clinton Council on sustainable development at the White House. So it's pretty impressive career, Molly. Yeah, and so thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate that you're taking the time out to do this, and with everybody that's tuning in. It's pretty exciting. I've never done this. It's very strange.
Me too. It's strange for both of us.
Yeah, it's so strange. Well, we're doing lots of firsts during these times. So
it's true.
Yeah, I wanted also to tell people just a really brief outline of Kowtow and where we've come from. I mean,
Awesome.
I think most of the people tuning in will know our story. I'd say they've probably been following us for a while. But for me, sustainability and ethics and traceability in the supply chain is why I started Kowtow. And it wasn't necessarily fashion that drove that. I'm not a trained fashion designer. For me, it was the passion of finding out if I can trace something back to its seed. And really, the Fairtrade labeling organization allowed me that. And I thought, this is so cool. So we really have been developing for 15 years now the seed to garment story. And you know, and I think the pillar of what we're doing and why we're doing it is the Fairtrade labeling organization, and giving us the ability to be able to trace that supply chain. Without you guys and what you do, we wouldn't be able to do that. It would be difficult, especially in cotton, because cotton is such a complex supply chain. So I wanted to really pick your brain with some meaty questions. And we've been developing these questions throughout the week, or last week, with our CEO and marketing manager, with their input as well. So the first one is, what is the Fairtrade labeling organization, and how does it work in the auditing supply chain? Could you give us a bit of an intro about that?
Sure. Absolutely delighted. And I can't say what an honor and a pleasure it is to be with you, Gosha, because Kowtow has been doing this so well for so many years, and just such a brilliant brand that is really walking the talk. You know, you don't have to worry about modern slavery in your supply chains. You don't have to worry about that, because you really have been playing an amazing leadership role. So it's absolutely a pleasure. So Fairtrade is really designed to be a structural transformation of global trade. And the way it works is we have a minimum price, which protects the farmers to ensure that they're getting at least the cost of production. Now in the world today, almost no poor producers in least developed countries are actually getting a reasonable, sustainable price for their commodities. And the best price they can possibly get is the fair trade price. If the commodity price goes up, of course, it goes up for all the farmers everywhere, including the fair trade farmers. But the floor price basically protects the farmers against ultimately subsidizing our fashion in this case. There's a set of standards that sit behind that, and that covers all of the critical issues in terms of environmental protection, good governance, child labor, gender equality. It's a fantastic, if you looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and you compared them to the standards that sit behind fair trade and what's required of everybody in that supply chain, you would find the alignment is just remarkable. And then there's a premium, which the companies who are investing in fair trade supply chains and who care about the future of their producers also invest in. And that premium tends to be somewhere around 8 to 15%. And that pool of resources, which globally now is about 175 million euros every single year, goes into communities of producers to enable them to build community projects. So schools, hospitals, you know, potable water. They get to choose whatever it is they believe they need in their path to development. So it's also a very enabling structure that supports their own choices about their future. And so when a company like Kowtow invests in a fair trade supply chain and ensures that their supply chain is meeting all of these amazing sustainability requirements for people, planet, and for prosperity, they're really ensuring that the future of all of the players in that supply chain, and particularly the most vulnerable, are really looked after. So it's a major investment, and something that you can be incredibly proud to be a leader in.
It's sometimes, I mean, it's so nice to hear that, because I don't know what manufacturing is like on the flip side. I've never looked into it. I've never really thought about.
Imagined it.
We're quite busy with what we do, trying to stay positive and working on problems and solving them and really keeping ourselves accountable. And, you know, we do that daily. If you didn't want to work in a challenging environment, you wouldn't work at Kowtow.
Or in Fairtrade, I promise you.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
and
very hard.
I think that was, you know, one of the questions that I had written down. What's the difference that you see, the main difference between conventional production and fair trade production? Because I think you're going to have a lot more knowledge about that than I do, because all I know is the factories that we've worked with. We've been them for 15 years, one factory for 15 years and the other factory for 6 years. We don't change factories, we don't plan to change factories, and we're going through an extremely challenging period at the moment with this COVID crisis, where we're going to end up with a whole bunch more units than we need, because our customers might drop off. We don't know what's going to happen, but we are committed to taking that stock. We're committed to working with our factories. We're not cancelling orders, because we don't just ditch people and go to the next one. And I know that can happen in the conventional model. I just wonder how ruthless it is, and the differences that you see between, because I think fair trade goes beyond just the standards as well. It goes to people like me and the people that I work with who have just a common decency to how they trade. Yeah, could you
it's a really great
evolve
question
on that?
Yeah, really great question. Well, to look at the basic question, which is what's the difference between fair trade and regular supply chains out there? Well, to just look at modern slavery in particular, it's never been more profitable. $156 billion every single year, US dollars, in profits. That's just in profits from supply chains in the world, 68% of which is here in Asia. So what we see when we try to push the price down is, if you're paying $2 for a t-shirt or a school uniform, you can bet that the price was paid by somebody somewhere, and it's usually a child or some form of enslaved kind of labor, which is worse than it's ever been in the world today. So I guess that the comparison is, you don't know what's in your supply chain if you're constantly pushing on contracts and saying, no, we're only going to pay this price and we're going to push the price down as far as we can. Somebody will find you someone in horrible conditions doing, you know, the most unbearable kinds of slavery. They will find it, and they will find you that for that price. And so that's unfortunately what the don't ask, don't tell global economy is like. If the price is everything, and if you're not willing to pay for a decent day's work for people, then it ends up being modern slavery. And that's why it's such a massive problem now. And I guess the flip side of that is, if you really do care about the future of your business, yes, it will always cost more than slavery to do something properly. And fair trade prides itself in continuously improving the ways that we address these challenges. And they are really challenging. I mean, the work that we do together and in our separate organizations is hard work. The world is not designed to pay people fairly, and to ensure that kids are in school, and to ensure that people have fundamental things that we all take for granted, like water in schools and you know, healthy air. So I guess what I think is fascinating, and in these very challenging times, and COVID-19 has just blown things out of the water in many, many ways. I mean, supply chains have been disrupted, shops are shut. You know, in the flower business, we saw, I think it was something in the order of $40 million in contracts canceled almost overnight for Ethiopian women working in flower farms that were sending flowers all over the world, including as far away as Australia. So, you know, it is having this massive impact. But I guess the upside of that is, what it's telling us is what we've really known all along in our gut, which is we are all connected. And if we think that we can live in a world where commerce is promoting slavery and pushing child trafficking and is pushing these terrible things that are happening in supply chains every day, I mean, you know, we realize now that we really are genuinely connected, and we can't live with supply chains like that in the long run and not have the kinds of human and environmental impacts that we're having in our supply chain. So I guess my hope really in this COVID crisis is that we can learn really deeply that we are always going to be connected, and anytime anyone in any supply chain is vulnerable or pushed into slavery or not given a fair go to have a decent living and livelihood, then all of us will suffer ultimately.
how does someone who's going, I bet you some fashion designers are tuning into this. How does someone know whether they're getting it into a supply chain that isn't ethical?
Well,
You know,
this is
because fair trade is only one aspect. Can you hear me? Is it? I think there might be a little delay.
I can just you popped out there for a minute, but I know that internet lines everywhere are challenged right now. So I did lose you for a split second, but you're still there. Look, how do you know? That is why a partner like Fairtrade is so important. What happens in the world today is that people will promise you anything. Everybody wants to bask in the glow of being sustainable. Nobody, you won't find any CEO of any company anywhere that says, oh, no, we're not worried about sustainability. We don't care about people. Nobody will tell you that. But what happens
really noticing that at the moment too. I mean, it's just like greenwashing on a next level. I mean, everybody's got something to say.
It's true. And I call this fair washing, because what happens is, instead of actually doing the hard yards of understanding all the parts of your supply chain and having visibility and traceability and independent auditing across all those parts of your supply chain, which is what Fairtrade does and what Kowtow is doing with Fairtrade. If without that, you can't promise anything. You really cannot promise anything, because this kind of terrible behavior, and modern slavery is just the latest kind of form of it, happens when you're not looking. So in Fairtrade, we have systematic audits, and some of them are scheduled, and some of them, especially where there are particular vulnerabilities, like in cocoa, are unannounced audits. And those unannounced audits, funnily enough, are when you find things. You almost never find something when you've planned an audit, because you know that they know you're coming. And so guess what? They're prepared. They've got the right spreadsheets. They've got all the people with their lunches and whatever it is in a lovely, clean environment. And it's when you do those unannounced audits, which Fairtrade does ruthlessly to ensure that we're protecting the most vulnerable people in those supply chains. And in the absence of that, you can make all the promises in the world, but if you're not able to transparently verify and have someone independently verify, as Fairtrade has with flow certification, independently be able to test that, then you can make all the promises in the world, and probably not much or very little is happening.
Yeah, totally. I've got another question here, which I think is quite important. And basically, Fairtrade Australia and New Zealand talks about the Fairtrade social, economic, and environmental standards that must be met for certification. Can you outline the key standards in relation to cotton production and manufacturing?
That's a very, very good question. And the standards for cotton, there's a number of standards that are across absolutely everything. So things like governance, things like equality and child protection are all absolutely across every attribute of all commodities that Fairtrade requires. In the Fairtrade standards for cotton, it includes things like hygiene. The minimum price of cotton, of course, is absolutely part of that. The hygiene standards are quite significant, and producer organizations are held to those, just because, especially now, I guess I would say with COVID, there are real standards that are kicking in for social distancing and all the things that we have to do. We're making sure that our farmers are actually also doing that where they are allowed to continue doing their work.
I also wonder if people actually know that the Fairtrade farming, the farms that we get our cotton from, that's also organic, they're very small farms. They are they're only 1 to 2 acres of land, and they will grow, lentils in between every second row, so the farmers have food. They are normally family run. These are not big Monsanto farms.
No.
Really, we're talking grass.
Less than an acre of land often.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Exactly.
It's tiny.
So
yeah,
one of the really important things that the standards does is it actually allows farmer to have pre-finance for their crops, and to be able to request partial payment in advance,
yeah,
to enable them to actually make sure that they can provide you know, these orders, and it protects them in case, you know, orders are
yeah.
canceled.
This is really interesting because I was just talking to our GM and our management team today, this interview, and you know, ever done fair trade, the fair trade model. You know, I got told today that with conventional, the way you some of the conventional factories, the factory will not see any payments until delivery, and then sometimes on 30 or 60-day
60
terms.
days later.
So for us, we pay most of our mostly we work in an 18 month production chain from seed to garment. So we pay the farms to pick the cotton. It goes to get to the ginning mill. They get paid. Then it goes to the spinning mill. Then it goes to the weaving mill. Then it goes to the knitting mill. We create, because we have a connection with the farms, we're creating the warp, the weft, the color, the yarn. You know, everything is unique to Kowtow, but that requires an extreme amount of planning. It's the opposite of fast fashion. It's an 18-month production cycle. We sea freight everything, and our cash flow has to allow for us to prepay for most of it to pay the people for their work. So it's really interesting that you're saying that, because that's exactly what I'm doing. So it lines up.
Well, and you imagine it, because if a poor farmer, I mean, basically what that means is, in the absence of that approach, you've got some of the poorest people, most marginalized people eking out an existence that are subsidizing effectively our fashion, which, by the way, $400 billion every year is actually just discarded. And every second, I'm told, a truckload of fashion is actually thrown out every day, every hour of every day. So, oh no, every second, sorry, a truckload of clothing is burned or landfilled every second of every day.
Oh, no.
To the tune of $400 billion every year. So what we're doing is we're pushing the cost of fashion down to the most vulnerable, and we're making them subsidize that. So if they're not getting paid till 60 days after the garment is actually delivered, which is what the normal practices are, you know, and you're paying 18 months beforehand so that it can actually follow in the whole supply chain. The difference for them, you can imagine, is existential.
Yeah, it is. I think, you know, and we visit the production chain. We visit our manufacturers twice a year, and we visit the entire production. It's very lengthy, less than that, but we do visit. And it is fascinating and mind-boggling and overwhelming and amazing and all the things that India is. Yeah,
It is
I wonder.
amazing.
We've been kind of talking to each other now for 20 minutes. I wonder if we should open it
Gosh,
up.
time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, you're just such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, is there anything you wanted to add extra, or should we open up some questions to the people that are listening and see what they would like to ask us?
I would love to open it up for questions. The one thing I would just try to put into a little bit of context is there are over 700 million people around the world who actually are living on less than $2 a day. And so when we think about why fair trade exists, and we've been around now for about 34 years, trying to transform trade, we have achieved a lot, and there is an amazing amount that is going on in the world of fair trade across a number of products. It's about a $10 billion every year trade in retail sales, for instance, but it's still not enough until we have been able to transform all trade so that it's adhering to something like these basic parameters. Then we're going to continue to have millions and millions of people eking out an existence on less than $2 a day. And given what I just said about the fashion that's being wasted, the 400 billion a year that we're throwing away, doesn't it, you know, one of the wonderful things about COVID is we can pause for a minute and we can think about what we're living without right now. And is it really
amazing.
that bad for us? Is it bad to spend more time at home with our families? Is it bad not to be spending so much, you know, in retail? if we just thought for a minute about it, wouldn't it be amazing if this could bring a positive outcome for people in places who aren't going to have any chance of getting a vaccine for the virus? They're going to be very, very lucky if they get to eat, you know, during this whole crisis. So I'm hopeful that, and love the thought of opening up to questions, that we can all really think and reflect about what is the price we're paying right now for the pain and suffering we're causing in the world? And couldn't we all do what Kowtow's doing and what Fairtrade's trying to help companies to do, and actually just help get that marginal difference out there so that people can have a reasonable life and dignity.
And also to add to that, what's so amazing about cotton as well is that it's a natural fiber, so it's biodegradable. It will leave no footsteps, and you know, we work on a full circularity model now, and I'm more passionate about it than ever. You know, this is, I think, you know,
that's a really important point, because I tell you what, there's a lot in sustainability circles about recycled plastic bottles, but I have to tell you, I am told that not only are we near the tipping point of having more plastic in the world's ocean than fish by weight, but actually there is apparently, I'm horrified to share with you that there are not fish in the North Sea that don't have microplastics in them. So I actually think that if we think it's a good thing to recycle plastic bottles into things and clothing that we put on our bodies, I, for one, can't bear to have anything like that against my skin. But also just the way we're dealing with the world, we're accumulating this vast amount of stuff that actually the world and the planet wasn't designed to hold. So I do think that we're going to have to really think about, why is it the natural fibers are so much better for the ecosystem and for the environment and for people?
When I visit the farms, it's very clear to me that it's a very beautiful place, because it's a place where there's a lot of biodiversity because of the organic farming, the fair trade farm. So they grow food, there's insects, there's
butterflies.
There's butterflies, and it feels good, you know, and it feels like it's coming from the earth, and you know, people are making an income, and it feels like it's part of the natural world. That's how I perceive it. But guys, we're gonna ask a few questions. I noticed there was a question beforehand, so I'm gonna answer that one from Ali, and it was, can you see these questions, Molly, or is it just me?
I can see some thumbs up and some clapping and some yes comments, but I don't see a question at this stage. That's lovely.
So I've got a first question here, which is, are you expecting cost upturns with the revised COVID distancing, or is the production not affected due to the smaller scales? Has there been forecasting around this? I mean, I can take that question. It's a really good question, because we are literally discussing cash flow forecasting and costs and how we're going to tackle this every day. And the first reaction, you know, in the first week when New Zealand went into lockdown, both our stores had to close. 250 retailers around the world, most of them are closed. 60% of our income has stopped. You know, where we can rely on is online sales, and we've had amazing support on that, which has been great. So it's scary, but what's amazing is our team is brainstorming out of this. Like, we are adapting, and I don't know if the costs will go up of our garments. We haven't got that far in the planning. I don't see why it would. I would say that the volume, well, for the orders that we've already placed for summer, we can't change those orders. Those garments have already been made, and we're committed to taking those on. So we need to come up with a plan on how on earth we're going to sell them.
I'll buy them.
But 14 years of production, we've really got so little left, because we do keep a really tight rack on how we order. So this is going to be a new thing for us. So I think it's a really good question, because we're in the middle of all of this, and I have a very highly competent team of 36 people, and I think what I'm really proud of is the fact that we are forecasting 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years ahead of how we are going to ride this out, because and I every day I feel more confident that we're going to get through this. And it's important for a company like Kowtow to get through this more than
It
other
is
companies.
absolutely vital. It is absolutely vital
You
that
know?
the companies, and in fact, we're doing exactly the same thing at Fairtrade globally. And here in ANZ, we're doing scenarios forecasting. We're looking at what happens if we're shut down for 6 months, what happens if 12 months, what happens if 18 months, and how long can we support our licensees, support our producers, you know, because in our system, it's of course a domino effect. I mean, if we don't have the licensees investing in these supply chains, then we're not able to support the international standards and the auditing, and you know, it's all, and we're reassured because we have been very well managed, and we currently have you know, a good, you know, we're in a reasonable shape, but we have to be able to hold on and help all of the parts of that supply chain hold on. So we've got to help the producers who, you know, 30% of the licensing income that comes into us actually goes to producers, to Fairtrade International. And so we need to just make sure that everybody is ready to kind of step back in and keep going when this is, you know, when COVID is over. And that's not as easy in something like a fresh flower as it is in garments and coffee. Unfortunately, fresh flowers really have been hit very hard, and it's mostly women in Ethiopia and places like that that are at the moment. So we've got emergency relief processes in place to support those farmers who are in real immediate trouble. And we've allowed them to use the premium money for whatever COVID-related health prevention and anything else they need to try to manage our way out of the crisis that we presently have. So this scenarios planning is important. But just back to the original question, is it going to be more expensive? Well, how could it be more expensive than, you know, 400 billion wasted and dumped in landfills? And I mean, right now, if we actually were calculating the costs of the system as a whole and realizing the cost to all of us individually of the waste in the system, and to the people at the most vulnerable parts of the system, the costs are enormous right now. So I guess what I would say is, isn't it smarter to buy a smaller number of really high quality products from a place like Kowtow, where you know that the history of them, you know, everything from the seed right into the end of that supply chain, and pay a little bit more to make sure that you've got that insurance, is what I certainly personally would choose to do.
Yeah, yes, of course. I've got another question here. I think this one's a really good one. So do you, or did you, from Tay, struggle to trust that your suppliers and manufacturers are function as they say that they are? I think, you know, we touched upon this kind of skepticism when we first had our conversation together originally. And I think for me, what was really important is going to visit the supply chain. And there's nothing more valuable than that. And the more you spend time in the supply chain, the less can be hidden. You know, when I go to the factory, I used to go to the factory to do the sample range. Now a production manager does that. I would sit there for 2 weeks. I mean, they didn't expect me to do that because I don't know how to do, I didn't know how to make mission. I don't come from this background. So I would just sit there and they would say, here's the showroom, you sit here and we'll bring you the samples. And I was like, I don't want to just sit here. And so I was the person in the screen print department with a hairdryer, you know, cracking jokes with them. And, you know, and then I was running to the CAD guy to print the pattern. And then I was, you know, like hustling on the sample machines, going, come on, put Kowtow on the machine, get that baby clothes off. And, you know, it's part of the factory banter. And I thought, it was so transparent. I mean, I was able to go anywhere. There's no stopping me. I'm not precious. And I'm not the sort of person that sits on my bum or everybody who knows me. You know, I don't have a desk. I can't sit still. And so I think going back to that question, I think you can get a lot out of by just going to a place and creating relationships. And once you've created a relationship, it touches your heart, and then you're less likely to say goodbye to them. You know,
I think that's really true.
Human interaction.
I think that's really true, Gosha. And you're one of those almost unique people that is deeply involved in those supply chains. And that's absolutely vital. But the other thing that is paired with that, and that's why the partnership between Kowtow and Fairtrade is so important, is if in those supply chains there's not really clear measurable standards and really clear breaches of those standards, and then a consequence for the breach of that standard, then actually you can have a direct relationship. I mean, we hear from coffee farmers all the time. Actually, it was very funny. One of our coffee roasters, I think it was in Denver, Colorado, said, you know, he kept being asked about direct trade. Well, I always go visit the farmers. I always go visit the farmers. Well, that's wonderful. And it is important. And it's the more you know the farmers and the more you know the communities, the less likely it is that there's going to be problems. You're quite right. But without that breach and consequence point about the standards and the underpinning structure, what he was saying was, well, he said, what's the difference between fair trade and direct trade? It's kind of like the difference between Superman and Usain Bolt. With Superman, he might jump higher and he might run faster, but we're not really sure he's real. With Usain Bolt, we know exactly how fast he runs, exactly how high he jumps, and somebody's checking to see if he's cheating. So yes, absolutely, we've got to visit the farms and we've got to be deeply involved in that. And that transparency runs right through everything, but it's those consequences, because every month there is somebody in the fair trade system that has breached something and are suspended. You know, there's a long list actually of various supply chains that address various issues. And if you're going to stay in the fair trade system, you have to be able to demonstrate and get tested against and have that visibility. And you will get thrown out of the system if you're violating things over and over and over. And in things like cocoa, you know, we have had to suspend and remove, not an insignificant, number of farmers because they just can't adhere to the rules. And if you can't protect that integrity in that supply chain, then you can't build the trust that fair trade has the great privilege to have, which is as really the most trusted and recognized ethical label in the world. And it's that hard work every day that goes into that.
I'm just going to try and find, I am listening. I'm trying to do two things at once. It's quite difficult. I am going to try another, trying to find another question. Keep the question coming, guys.
Yeah, awesome.
It's really great. I've got one here that says, what inspired me to go into fair trade? And I think I was at a vegetarian restaurant with a friend called Ari. She's listening in. She's a doctor now. And she said, you should start a fair trade organic cotton clothing label.
Hi, Ari. Thank you.
And I thought, what does that even mean? And started Googling it, and I thought, how cool to be able to trace something that is very difficult to trace all the way back, to the conception of it. And I felt that after doing a bunch of research, that the fair trade model really did allow for that. And for me, I felt I couldn't just do organic cotton. It had to be fair trade certified as well. You can't differentiate ethics and sustainability. It's the same thing. So we are one of the unique companies that do combine the two. And I think that's important to know as well, that you can be fair trade certified, but you don't have to be organic. But I think it's really, it's the only way forward. I mean, why are you going to do something halfway?
I absolutely believe that, and in fact, it's the best possible thing for the farmers if we can try to encourage as much organic and fair trade as possible, because that's where they get the best possible price for their commodities, and we want them to be not having to deal with chemicals, not having to deal with a lot of the environmental deforestation and things that are out there, and so you're quite right. The combination of organic and fair trade is the best possible kind of global supply chains we could be encouraging right now. And it is very, very important to be able to do both. And we're proud to be able to support both. So whenever the farmers are organic, we support the auditors to come in that are auditing against both sets of standards to be able to do it at the same time, to help save the farmer time and ensure that the farmers, systems are in good order, and it helps it be much more efficient for the farmers.
Yeah, I've got another great question. I love all these really tricky questions. It's so hardcore. I love
Me
it.
too.
I'm finding all the really tricky ones. So with mass production and the 4 billion cost of wastage to landfill, surely we ourselves with already existing textile on the planet. 100%. Totally. I mean, it's and this is where our circularity is really important, to get those garments back. So if you have a Kowtow garment that you it's got a stain on it, it's got a big hole in it, which we can repair for you. That's the first point of contact.
Wow.
Otherwise, if it's really just done, it's you've done something weird to it. We're taking we're taking it all back, but we need volume so that we can then divide it up, you know. And I imagine the denim will repurpose, and because it looks great when you repurpose denim. I imagine that some of the cotton we will reshred and remake into a yarn. Some of it, you know, but we really do need those garments to come back. But I think, you know, I mean, putting it out to you guys, I mean, as a young student, if you're tuning in, definitely try and use what already is there. You know, I happen to be in the Fairtrade organic cotton part of my career, but you know, I 100% agree. I mean, especially if we can make it look modern and fresh and exciting and wearable, and add some really great design to it, which I think is totally possible now. I mean, and that's what I think all the young students should be focusing on, is sustainability and how to use up what we've already got.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think
it is.
Yeah. So I think we've been speaking for a student over here. Look at this. Yeah, I think we should.
How can we do this at scale?
Did you find one?
Am I seeing questions? One of the things that I just
Probably
saw flash up was, how can we do this at scale? And I could make one little tiny point there, Garsha, which is that, you know, we think that the economy and commerce and trade is like physics, you know, and kind of putting a man on the moon. It's not. We actually designed the economy, and we can design it differently. And one of the interesting things about the way it works is that there are tipping points. So there was a time when single glazed windows were way cheaper than double glazed windows. I love to use this example because almost every home in the modern world actually now has double or triple glazed windows. And in California right now, if you tried to buy a single glazed window, it would cost way more than a double glazed window, because the standard is now double glazed, and that's the cheapest because that's what most people are buying. And so the price point comes down. So, you know, how can we get this to scale? Well, the best way to get this to scale is for demand to be out there. We're, you know, just saying to every kind of retailer, we want, you know, garments like Kowtow. We want garments that are sustainable, that are fair trade certified, independent, transparent, and have all of these attributes. And if you're demanding that and refusing to buy things that aren't that, then it will change very, very quickly. And the demand push point and the tipping point of that will actually change in our lifetime, maybe even if we're especially young people are aggressive enough about it. But we do have to know that our purchases matter. You know, where we put our money matters. And if we're investing in the solutions and buying less, but getting a higher quality and getting much more sustainable planet, then that factors into all of our equations, and it's much faster to scale if we all know the difference. And the thing about fair trade is I mean, it's one of the very few things out there where you absolutely know the difference. There are sustainability and actually ethical labels for cocoa and coffee and other things that don't even have minimum prices. How can you possibly be calling yourself an ethical label if you don't have a minimum price? Well, I mean, if you can negotiate any price, or if you allow the companies to determine how the premium is spent, if there is a premium, which isn't transparently clear to anybody. So there are all these different things that if you're not doing them, then you know that you're getting away with all kinds of fair washing. But if you are doing them, it will push the whole of commerce to be much better organized. And I keep saying that I'll be really happy when the World Trade Organization's rules are the same as fair trade's rules, and trade everywhere is meeting these very basic human rights and environment and people sort of standards.
Yeah, here to that. That's great. That's awesome.
Let's get to scale.
Just touch up on something that people have been asking in the feed is other fibers. And we have dabbled in other fibers, but it becomes extremely tricky with the supply chain. So our thing at Kowtow, the pillar of what we do is traceability in the entire supply chain from seed to garment. So people are talking about hemp and linen, and I'm sure there is French grown hemp in France, and I'm sure there's hemp grown in America from Americans. We haven't explored that because I think I'm extremely passionate about cotton. I think it's a beautiful fiber, and it's very diverse, and it's breathable, and it's natural, and we can make it warm and we can make it cool. And I know our head designer is really passionate about cotton, and we actually want to explore it more. I think we've got such a unique production chain with it. Why should we really stress ourselves out and go into all these other production chains that just opens up a whole bunch of doors when we could really specialize in the one thing that we're doing and do it well and do it better, you know? So at the moment, because we've been visiting the production chain for so long, we are now sponsoring an orphanage next to the factory, and we send the girls to school. You know, we can make personal relationships that are even outside of fair trade as a company based on the values that we have. If we go and do too much, and this is the whole point of what we do, is this idea of reductive design. You know, we don't have zips. We have 3 different buttons that we use, and they're all like really specific, you know, and we have such a limited palette of what we do. And I think that's what I'm really proud of, and we've kept that really safe for 15 years. And that it gives us a real point of difference to other companies as well, I think.
Wasn't it Chanel that said, fashion always changes, but style remains the same, or something like that?
Right.
It reminds me. It reminds me that there's a thing in the U.S. called LL Bean, and if you looked at an LL Bean catalog going back 100 years, you would actually be amazed to see it is a very practical, very useful. They do raincoats, they do, you know, and I'm always comforted by looking at an LL Bean catalog, because everything in there is useful and kind of well designed, well enough designed, like a Levi jean, that it's going to last, you know, quite a long time.
Yeah. We've got another good question here, and
just one tiny point, though, I just want to make, Kowtow, because I think that's right for Kowtow, that you're focused on the things that you're doing well. But I guess what I would say is, if we're really serious about transforming global supply chains, then there is no reason why producers with yaks or alpacas or any other kind of natural fiber couldn't be entering different supply chains with different sort of products that they specialize in. You know, everybody doesn't have to do everything. I think if we can have, if we look at the goal as being transformative trade that enables everyone in that supply chain to have good, healthy fibers and good, healthy, transparent supply chains for the environment and for people, then we need all companies to be looking at these issues. And you know, whether they're using other fibers is something that is a wide open door. But not for everybody. I mean, let people specialize and do it well, like Kowtow has.
Yes. It's 100%. Yeah.
Next question. My arm's not quite long enough.